Hello, I'm Kane Bird. I'm from CSI and I'm the head of marketing.
I'm Andrew Laidlaw. I'm one of the technical specialists within the IBM Power brand here at IBM. My job is to support our customers and our business partners understand all of the latest and greatest features of the Power servers, the software that sits on top of them, the operating systems, and all the great capabilities we can offer, including containerization, AI infusion, modern development practices, and so much more than that.
Well, it's great to have you today, Andrew, and thanks for taking the time to talk to us. So let's start with the elephant in the server room, legacy infrastructure. Andrew, you've seen this play out across dozens of organizations. What does legacy actually mean as we approach a new age of infrastructure?
So for a lot of the customers we work with, I think legacy is a shorthand for something that they haven't invested in actively. Quite often it's running their mission critical workloads, their key business processes, but because it's just sat there and reliably performed, they don't notice it, they're not actively upgrading it, developing it, it's just at the core of their business. And much of the time that is left to get older, builds up potential security risks, but it's also not being seen as a platform where they can innovate, which is often the opposite.
What I like there that we're talking about is how it's not just about old hardware, it's about something a little bit more. So let's talk about that. Why do you think businesses hold on to infrastructure that's at end of support, even though they know there's a risk? Is it just budget, or is there something psychological happening there? Is there an emotional attachment, perhaps?
I think the psychological element is key here. For a lot of people, change is scary. So changing out your infrastructure, they see that as a potential risk. They don't necessarily see the risks inherent in not changing, not upgrading, and they don't notice the potential cost of continuing to use systems that have passed that end of support date, where parts may be less available, where those systems might be aging and more at risk of failure. All they can see is the cost and the disruption of that potential change.
Right, so the if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of mentality applies here.
It does a lot of the time, particularly with the more resilient systems, where you have systems that will just run for 5, 6, 7 years without interruption, without causing any problems to a business. Nobody really wants to change that for risk that there will be a disruption, that they will change something and it will cause them some problems.
Well, let's talk about risk and your infrastructure for a moment. What are the early warning signs that legacy infrastructure is moving away from, let's call it manageable, to actively dangerous for a business?
I think one of the first signs is that the vendor removes their support or changes the level of support that's available for those systems. That should be a really good clue for businesses that actually the parts availability may be limited, or that those systems have been active for such a long time they can't get the benefits of the new technologies, the new capabilities. The other thing, of course, is if there are problems. It's very rare that a system will just fail catastrophically one day. Instead, there will be small warning signs, maybe an adapter fails, maybe a piece of software doesn't work exactly as you expect it to, and it's these small things coming in that are signs that that hardware might be nearing the end of its life.
Interesting, interesting. So let's shift to cost for a moment. Can you walk us through what technical debt actually looks like on the ground? So maybe give us a real example, no names necessary, but we want scenarios where you've seen this type of debt compound over time.
So technical debt is a very real thing, and it's not just for software developers. In the hardware space, technical debt is as much about the decisions you don't make and the investments that you don't make as it is those decisions that you do. So we have customers who are running systems that are several years beyond the end of support, and they're finding that there's now a really large challenge in moving the workloads that are running on those to the latest platforms. They know that they need to update, but because they've left it so long, that transition is much more difficult and much more expensive for them. Moving from older operating systems, moving from older applications, and bringing those 5, 7, sometimes 10 years up to date, that's a big piece of work. The alternative to that is continual investment that continual maintenance of those workloads, which in the long run works out a lot lower cost because you're doing those step changes for each new operating system update, each new hardware generation, and you're not seeing one big expensive change every decade.
What I'm learning a lot from you, Andrew, increasingly, is that as we navigate infrastructure, it's equally about what you do see as what you don't see. So there's potentially costs you're not measuring or calculating. There's also the lost opportunities you're not seeing by not upgrading or refreshing soon enough. So let's talk about that for a little bit. What should organizations be measuring when they're trying to understand the real cost of their current infrastructure? And to that point, what are they missing?
The obvious costs are the cost of the hardware, the cost of the people to maintain it, the cost of the maintenance charges that you might be paying on that hardware to make sure you get the right level of support. The things that are missing or that are the invisible costs, it's the people costs. Older systems generally require more manual effort to keep them running, to keep them up to date. It's the security costs. The fact that there may be security vulnerabilities that are not patched on these older systems because they're no longer current. They're no longer in support, so the vendor might not be providing those patches. It's also things like the lack of opportunity with new capabilities. It's the inability to scale to meet demand if you're restricted to an older system. It's the fact that you can't run modern workloads like AI. You can't modernize the platform. You can't bring in the new management techniques, the automation, things like that that could save a business a huge amount of money.
Fascinating, fascinating. So let's take a step back. Let's say I'm a CFO who's been told we need a multi-million-pound infrastructure investment. What's the business case that I actually need to make to the board to make that happen?
I'm not a CFO myself, so my financial training is very limited, but from what we see, it all boils down to how much is this going to cost compared to the costs that I would be incurring in a do-nothing scenario, and what's the benefit? What's the extra income or revenue that might be coming into the business from this investment? At the end of the day, in finance, you want to know that your investment is bringing a return. You want to know that anything you invest in the infrastructure can deliver something meaningful to the business. And I think that's the best way to phrase all of these things, is to put them in terms of the business and what business results you would see from that investment.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andrew. So a lot of decision makers right now, they're looking at the landscape. They're seeing risk. They're seeing interruption. They're seeing disruptions. How are we going to begin to talk about quantifying risk in this equation? What I really want to know is, because the cost of downtime and a security breach isn't just financial, what should people be looking at when they're looking at risk?
Risk is one of those things that it's difficult to quantify and fully understand, but there are simple things you can do. So, as you mentioned, the average cost of a data breach in the most recent report from IBM is that in the UK, that's $4.14 million for a data breach. Not everybody is going to have a data breach every single year, but you can work out a rough percentage based on what you see in the media. Ransomware attacks are clearly on the rise. There's an epidemic, so we're seeing lots of these stories. Look at how likely you are to be hit by a ransomware attack or a data breach event, and then calculate, therefore, what's the average likely cost to me. That's one way to quantify it. Then you can factor that against the cost of updating your systems, providing the latest security patches. With Power 11 servers, we have zero planned downtime, so we can apply those security patches without any interruption to the workload. There's no compromise to be had. Your applications can continue running, and that in itself improves the security, reduces that risk of being hit by that data breach or by being hit by that ransomware attack.
I think between us, we could distill a lot of what we're talking about with infrastructure for decision makers into a really simple list of questions they should be asking. So let me have a crack at that. First question I think that people should be asking is, what is our infrastructure actually costing us today, including all the hidden costs? Next, we should ask, what opportunities are missing because our systems can't keep up? Maybe we ask next, what's our risk exposure if we keep going as is? And lastly, what does our business need to achieve in the next 3 to 5 years? And can our current infrastructure actually support that? Do you think that's a fair summary of questions that decision makers should ask of their infrastructure today?
I think that's a very fair set of questions and really helps inform the business as to what the value of that infrastructure is compared to what the cost of it is.
Decision makers are looking at a bit of a paradox of choice here. The infrastructure market is enormous. How should a business even begin to navigate what's out there? Cloud, hybrid, on-prem, hyper-converged. Where do you start?
My first bit of advice there is to not start with the infrastructure, to start thinking about it in terms of the business outcomes and what the business is looking to drive, because that should help drive those infrastructure decisions, the architectural choices. For some businesses, they might have security requirements or other regulatory requirements that mean they have to run things on premises. But that doesn't mean they have to forego all the benefits they would see from a cloud deployment. You can still have pay-as-you-go pricing, automation, new management tools and simplification, even if you're running things on premises. But likewise, you can have the same commercial models and that investment potential if you're running things in a public cloud. So it's all about starting with what is the business outcome that we require, and then making the right decisions as to where that workload runs, how that workload runs, what vendor you embrace who has all of the right capabilities to deliver what's right for your business.
Interesting. So what you're saying is before you even look at solutions, there's a bit of homework to be done first, a bit of intelligence gathering about what the business needs to overcome as a challenge that's immediately in front of it. Is that fair?
It is, yes. There should always be that thought of the future and planning for the future. And the best time to do that is when you have the time to properly think and plan out what your business is going to look like for the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it might be. That means that you're not just reacting in the event of a catastrophic failure of your hardware and incurring all the additional costs that that might bring with it. Instead, you're putting a plan in place of how you want to proceed and doing things in your own timeline where you get to make those decisions rationally.
Interesting. So on that point, I'd like to ask you, how do you buy infrastructure for tomorrow when today keeps changing?
That's where the planning really comes in helpful. 5 years ago, nobody was talking about AI. Very few companies were thinking of how do we do this, and now it's a multi-trillion-dollar industry. So 5 years ago, when you were making that architectural choice, how could you know that you needed specific technology for this? How could you plan your investment? You couldn't. But what you could do, and what you can still do today, is make sure that you're investing in a platform that is flexible enough and has the capabilities to deliver a variety of workloads. So that if things change within your business, your infrastructure, your workloads can change with them. Another important thing to consider is growth and the ability to scale to match that growth. That's something that can be predicted and often is within businesses. They always look at their growth trajectory, but sometimes things can come out of left field. It could be that your financial product is featured on morning television and all of a sudden you've got thousands of new applicants. Can you scale to meet that demand? It might be that a product that you sell is suddenly featured in an Instagrammer's post, somebody who's got real influence, and you've got this huge amount of demand. Can your systems, can your business scale to meet those demands and make the most of that opportunity?
So let's take that further then, and let's really drill down into this idea of future-proofing your infrastructure. How far out is the future when we talk about infrastructure? How far out can you realistically have a solid infrastructure plan? Is it 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Is there any advice you can give us more concretely around the amount of times that people should be planning within?
I think there are multiple layers of planning. So the CTO or the CIO within a business, they might be looking at 10 years out. They might be looking at the long-term view of how do we make the right investments now to set the standards for where we go in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years' time. On a more practical basis, when you are looking at an infrastructure investment, you're looking at the life of that investment. You need to be making the right decisions for the next 3 years, 5 years, 6 years. however long you expect to depreciate that asset over, and make sure that it's still delivering value in that amount of time, and more importantly, that it can adapt to meet the demands that will appear over those 5 or 6 years.
Interesting. So let's talk about this idea of the lifetime of an investment in infrastructure and look at the flip side of that coin. What makes a good infrastructure partner? Because this isn't just about a transactional relationship. You're potentially in this relationship for 5, 10, even longer.
The big thing is trust. It's finding a partner that you can work with and whose opinions that you trust, whose advice that you trust, and who understands your business well enough to provide that best quality of advice. I would always encourage working with a partner who specializes in the infrastructure space, in architecting the kinds of solutions you're looking at, because they come with that vast amount of knowledge from across multiple industries, across multiple vendors potentially, and they are best placed to provide that really clear advice for how your business can benefit from the right decisions.
What's the first action a decision maker should take if they suspect that their organization needs to modernize sooner rather than later?
I think the first thing that any of these decision makers should do is actually pause, take a step back and look at why they're doing this, what they're trying to achieve, and make sure that any decision they make from that point on is based on that requirement. So, do they understand what benefit this will bring to their business? Do they understand their growth? All these things that we've spoken about. And do they have the right advice coming from the right partner to help them achieve those goals? One of the worst things that anybody can do is rush into a plan because they've got to make a decision, either because the house is falling down around them or because they're on a really strict timeline to end of support or something like that. So having the time to plan, to think about things carefully is really crucial.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andrew. So let's talk about building internal buy-in for your infrastructure. How do you build consensus internally? Because this is usually a cross-functional decision that involves IT, finance, operations. There's a buying committee to consider.
Absolutely. And we've talked a little bit about the CFO viewpoint and that it's all about the investment and the return on that investment. Lines of business will think in similar ways, but they will also be looking at what's the benefit for them? What new things will they be able to do with this infrastructure that they couldn't do before? How can they innovate around the infrastructure to deliver something new and exciting to their business, to their customers, to the end consumers? So it's all about phrasing things in a way that the lines of business understand, the finance team understand, and showing that there is a clear understanding of just how important infrastructure is to every one of those stakeholders.
So lastly, we're going to talk about when do you bring in external expertise? Because I think this is a question important to most businesses. When should businesses bring in outside expertise? And is this something you can do DIY? Or when do you really need to bring in those partners that we mentioned?
Going down the DIY route is good for some companies where they have a real large investment in the people, the skills, and the knowledge on that IT side, and they've got the infrastructure know-how. That's really rare across all industries because the investment in a business should always be in the focus of that business. There are very few companies whose primary goal is IT. IT is there as an enabler. So my advice would always be bring in that partner, that expertise as early as possible to help guide even the early steps of your discussions. If you bring them in once you've made big decisions like, oh, we must go to cloud or we must work with this particular architecture type, it might be too late to then fully understand and realize what you could be missing out on. So my advice would always be find that trusted partner as early as possible and have those open and frank discussions.
So Andrew, anyone who's been hanging around the water cooler this year will know that AI is all around us. I know you've got quite an interesting insight about understanding that there's a lot of value to AI when you don't see it. Can you talk to us a bit about that?
I absolutely can. So we work with customers across all industries to help them understand how they can infuse AI into their businesses. And through that, what we've seen is that some of the most successful AI projects are the ones that you don't see, where the AI is not overt and in your face, but it's actually helping in the background to deliver a more efficient process, or to help present the right information in the right form at the right time. Within the Power 11 platform, we have AI infused in our management tools. So we can do zero plan downtime. We can use that intelligence to help improve the security posture of the system. We don't sell that as an AI solution. We sell that as management tooling to free up time, to improve efficiencies, and to improve the security posture.